The small woman with the quiet gaze was labeled dead weight the moment training began. She can't even lift a rucksack and she wants to shoot. Laughter echoed across the base. No one cared to ask her name, until a joking officer pulled up her sleeve and the room went silent. Tattooed on her left wrist, Kel 13. Minutes later, a military helicopter descended from the sky. A general stepped out and said, "Whoever bears this code answers only to me." Her name was Sarah Mitchell. 28 years old, soft brown hair falling loose over her shoulders, she stood out in the NATO training camp like a shadow in a spotlight. Her uniform was faded, the kind of old green that looked like it had been washed 100 times. No makeup, no jewelry, just her plain and silent watching everything with eyes that didn't blink too fast or linger too long. The other recruits, all sharp in their pressed gear, didn't know what to make of her. They didn't try either. To them, she was a mistake. A glitch in the system. Someone who'd slipped through the cracks and landed in a place she didn't belong. The camp was elite, a proving ground for the best of the best, mostly men, all muscle and ambition, strutting through drills like they were born for it. And then there was Sarah, assigned to the lowest-ranked squad, the one they called the Stragglers. Nobody asked why. They just assumed she was weak. The first day during roll call, the squad leader barely looked at her. "Mitchell, stay out of the way," he barked, his voice carrying over the gravel yard. A couple of guys snickered. One, a tall recruit with a buzz cut and a smirk, leaned over to his buddy. "Bet she's here for diversity points. Can't even carry her own bag." Sarah didn't flinch. She just adjusted the strap on her rucksack, her movement slow and deliberate, and fell in line at the back. The other recruits marched ahead, their boots kicking up dust. She kept pace, her steps steady, her face blank. But if you looked close, you'd see her fingers tighten around the strap just for a second before letting go. That night, a group of recruits gathered near the barracks, swapping stories about their hometowns. Sarah sat on a bench nearby, sharpening a small knife against a whetstone, the sound a faint rhythm in the dark. A recruit named Tyler Wiry loud spotted her and sauntered over, his buddies trailing behind. "What's that, your kitchen knife?" he sneered, snatching the blade from her hand. He held it up, letting it glint in the moonlight. "You gonna peel potatoes for us, Mitchell? That's all you're good for." His friends laughed, one of them mimicking a chopping motion. Sarah's eyes flicked up, steady and unblinking. She held out her hand, palm up, waiting. Tyler tossed the knife into the dirt, instead spitting at her feet. "Pick it up, princess." Sarah didn't move. She just looked at him, her silence heavier than any words. Tyler's grin faltered, but he turned away, his buddies jeering as they left. Sarah bent down, retrieved her knife, and went back to sharpening the sound, unchanged. That night in the mess hall, the chatter was loud, guys boasting about their scores, their hometowns, their plans to climb the ranks. Sarah sat alone at the end of a long table, her tray holding a single slice of bread and a cup of black coffee. A female soldier, all sharp ponytail and sharper attitude, walked by with her group. She stopped, looked Sarah up and down, and snorted. "Why does the army even accept trash like her? Look at that uniform. Did you pull it out of a dumpster?" Her friends laughed loud enough to turn heads. Sarah didn't look up. She just tore off a piece of bread, chewed slowly, and kept her eyes on her tray. The woman waited, expecting a reaction, but when none came, she rolled her eyes and walked off. "Pathetic," she muttered. Sarah's hand paused over her coffee cup. Then she picked it up and took a sip. The next morning, during a gear inspection, the same female soldier whose name tag read Carter decided to make a show of it. She walked up to Sarah, who was organizing her kit on a table, and knocked her canteen to the ground. The metal clanged against the concrete, drawing every eye in the room. "Oops," Carter said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Guess you're too weak to hold on to anything, huh?" She kicked the canteen across the floor, sending it skidding under a bench. The other recruits laughed, some clapping like it was a performance. Sarah crouched down, retrieved the canteen, and wiped it clean with her sleeves. She stood up, her face blank, and set it back on the table. Carter leaned in, her voice low and mean. "You're an embarrassment. Go home before you get someone killed." Sarah's eyes met hers, steady and cold, but she didn't speak. She just turned back to her kit, her hands moving with the same calm precision. Carter huffed and walked away, but the room buzzed with whispers, the laughter lingering like a stain. "Hey, before we go on, can you do me a quick favor? Grab your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to keep sharing stories like this, stories about people who get knocked down but keep standing. Thanks for being here with me. Now let's get back to Sarah. The next morning, the real humiliation kicked in. It was the first big drill, a 10-mile march with full gear under a sun that felt like it was trying to melt the earth. The squad leaders split everyone into groups, and Sarah, of course, got stuck with the stragglers. They were a mix of guys who'd barely passed the physical, and a couple of loudmouths who thought they were above it all. One of them, a stocky recruit named Derek, took one look at Sarah and scoffed. "Let her sit this one out. She might sprain a nail." The others laughed, their voices carrying across the field. The squad leader, a guy with a permanent scowl, didn't correct him. He just pointed to the back of the line. "Mitchell, stay there. Don't slow us down." Sarah nodded, her face unreadable, and adjusted her rucksack again. The march started, and the group moved out, their boots thudding against the dirt. Sarah stayed at the rear, her pace steady, her eyes fixed on the ground. During a water break, Derek wasn't done. He grabbed Sarah's rucksack while she was refilling her canteen and dumped its contents into the dirt socks, a notebook, a small metal compass. "What's this, your diary?" he said, picking up the notebook and flipping through it. The pages were blank, but he tore one out anyway, crumpling it in his fist. "Write this down, you don't belong here." The other guys laughed, one filming it on his phone, the video already spreading among the recruits. Sarah knelt down, gathering her things, her hands steady but her jaw tight. She picked up the compass, last turning it over in her palm before slipping it back into her bag. Derek tossed the crumpled page at her feet and walked off, his laughter echoing. Sarah stood up, slung her rucksack over her shoulder, and kept marching, her steps unchanged. Halfway through, the heat was brutal. Guys were sweating through their shirts, cursing under their breath. Derek, red-faced and panting, kept glancing back at Sarah. She wasn't struggling. Not even close. Her breathing was even, her steps measured. It pissed him off. "Yo, dead weight," he called out loud enough for the whole squad to hear. "You gonna faint yet? Or you just here to look pretty?" A few guys chuckled, but Sarah didn't respond. She just kept walking, her gaze straight ahead. Derek wasn't done. He slowed his pace, falling back until he was next to her. "What's your deal, huh? You think you're one of us? You can't even keep up." Sarah's eyes flicked to him just for a second, and she said, "I'm keeping up fine." Her voice was low, calm, but it cut through the noise like a blade. Derek blinked, thrown off, then muttered something under his breath and jogged back to his spot. Later that day, during a debrief, the squad leader handed out performance scores. Sarah's was the lowest, marked with a red F on the sheet, posted for everyone to see. Derek pointed at it, laughing. "Look at that. F for failure. Or maybe for fraud." The others joined in their voices, a chorus of mockery. Sarah stood at the back, her arms crossed, her eyes on the sheet. But then she tilted her head just slightly and pointed at Derek's score, barely a C. "At least I'm not pretending," she said, her voice soft but clear. The room went quiet, the laughter dying fast. Derek's face turned red, but he didn't say another word. That moment stuck with a few of them. Not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it wasn't. Sarah didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She just said what she said and kept moving. But the squad leader noticed. He didn't say anything, just watched her for a second longer than he needed to before barking at everyone to pick up the pace. The march ended with the stragglers coming in last, no surprise there. But Sarah wasn't the one dragging them down. She crossed the finish line with the same steady steps, her rucksack still snug on her back, while Derek and a couple others were bent over, gasping for air. Nobody said anything about it. Not yet. The following day, during a combat training session, Sarah was paired with a recruit named Vance, a hulking guy with a mean streak and a reputation for breaking sparring partners. The instructor barely glanced at them before saying, "Mitchell, don't waste his time. Just tap out now." Vance grinned, cracking his knuckles. "This'll be quick." The sparring started, and Vance came at her hard, throwing punches that could have cracked ribs. Sarah dodged, her movements light and precise, but she didn't strike back. The other recruits gathered, cheering Vance on their voices, a wall of noise. "Put her down," one shouted. Vance grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back, and leaned in close. "You're nothing, Mitchell. Just quit." Sarah's face didn't change. She twisted out of his grip in one smooth motion, leaving him stumbling. The crowd went silent, but Vance's laugh was loud and cruel. "Lucky move, princess. Won't happen again." He charged, and the instructor blew the whistle, ending the match. Vance spat on the ground near her feet as he walked off the crowd, jeering. Sarah wiped a bead of sweat from her brow and walked away, her back straight, her silence louder than their noise. The next week things got worse. It was a simulated operation, a nighttime drill meant to test navigation and stealth. The squad was split into smaller teams, each with a lead scout guiding them through a mock enemy territory. Sarah's team was led by a guy named Marcus, all confidence and clipped orders, the kind of recruit who thought he was destined for a corner office at the Pentagon. They were moving through a dense patch of woods, the GPS unit in Marcus's hand blinking faintly. Sarah was at the back again, her eyes scanning the trees. She noticed the GPS screen flicker, then show a route that didn't match the map they'd studied. She stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're walking straight into a radar trap." Marcus laughed, not even turning around. "Yeah, okay, Mitchell. Go back to carrying your purse." The others snickered, but Sarah didn't back down. She pointed at the screen. "Look at the coordinates. You're off by 2 degrees. That's a live zone." Marcus rolled his eyes, but then the GPS beeped a sharp, ugly sound. The screen flashed red, "Enemy alert." The drill was aborted, the whole team sent back to base. The commander, a grizzled guy named Captain Ruiz, stormed over, his voice like gravel. "Who screwed this up?" Nobody answered. Marcus stared at the ground, his jaw tight. But a couple of guys glanced at Sarah and Ruiz caught it. "Who spotted that?" he asked again. Silence. Sarah didn't say a word, just adjusted her sleeve and looked away. Ruiz's eyes lingered on her, but he didn't push. Not then. The next morning, Marcus cornered her outside the barracks, his face red with humiliation. He shoved a crumpled map into her chest hard enough to make her step back. "You think you're smart, huh?" "Making me look bad." He tore the map in half, letting the pieces fall to the ground. "Stay in your lane, Mitchell, or I'll make sure you're gone." The other recruits watched, some nodding, others whispering. Sarah bent down, picked up the torn pieces, and folded them neatly before slipping them into her pocket. She looked at Marcus, her voice low. "You're welcome." His eyes widened, but he turned away, the crowd dispersing. Later, Ruiz called Marcus into his office. Nobody knew what was said, but Marcus came out pale, his hands shaking, and he didn't look at Sarah again. The whispers started after that. Little things. Guys who'd mocked her before started watching her a bit closer. Not with respect, not yet, but with something else. Curiosity, maybe? Or suspicion. She didn't fit. She was too quiet, too calm, too something. And then there was her wrist. During a weapons check a few days later, an officer named Lieutenant Brady, all swagger and cheap cologne, noticed Sarah always kept her left sleeve pulled down. He grabbed her arm, yanking the sleeve up before she could stop him. There it was. KLL013 etched in faint black ink, the lines sharp and strange like something machined into her skin. The room went quiet for a split second, then erupted in laughter. "You faked that in a tattoo shop," Brady said, his grin wide. "What's it supposed to be, your gamer tag?" The other recruits howled. A guy in the back shouted, "Looks like a prison tat." Sarah pulled her arm back, her face blank, but her fingers curled into a fist for just a moment before relaxing. That evening, Brady took it further. During a briefing, he projected Sarah's personnel file onto a screen for the whole squad to see basic info. No history, just her name and a blank space where her clearances should have been. "Look at this," he said, pointing at the screen. "She's a ghost. No record, no nothing. Probably lied her way in." He turned to her, his voice mocking. "What's your secret, Mitchell?" "Run away from a trailer park." The room laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. Sarah sat at the back, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the screen. She tilted her head just slightly and said, "You missed a page." Brady froze his finger, hovering over the projector. He clicked to the next slide, and there it was, a classified stamp, red and bold with her name in small print. The laughter stopped. Brady cleared his throat and shut the projector off, but the damage was done. Sarah stood up, her movements slow, and walked out, leaving the room in silence. Brady wasn't done. He leaned in, his voice dripping with mock curiosity. "I've seen military codes for 20 years. That one's garbage." "What are you hiding, Mitchell?" Sarah looked at him, her eyes steady, and said, "Nothing you'd understand." The room went quiet again, but this time it wasn't laughter. It was the way she said it, calm, final, like she was closing a door. Brady's grin faltered, but he shrugged it off, tossing her rifle back to her. "Whatever dead weight, clean your gear." Sarah caught the rifle, her movement smooth, and went back to work. But a few people didn't laugh this time. They just watched. The next day, during a field exercise, Brady assigned Sarah to clean the squad's weapons while the others ran drills. It was grunt work meant to humiliate her in front of everyone. He handed her a bucket of solvent and a rag, smirking. "Don't mess this up, Mitchell. It's the only thing you're good for." The other recruits watched, some chuckling, others shaking their heads. Sarah took the bucket, her face blank, and started cleaning her hands, moving with a precision that made the task look almost graceful. Halfway through, she noticed a rifle with a misaligned sight. She adjusted it, tested the trigger, and set it aside. When Brady came back, he picked up the rifle, fired a test shot, and hit the target dead center. His smirk faded. He looked at Sarah, then at the rifle, and muttered, "Lucky fix." But one of the other officers, a quiet man named Lieutenant Kim, saw the whole thing. He wrote something in his notebook and nodded to Sarah just once before walking away. The other recruits didn't notice, but Sarah did. She wiped her hands on the rag and kept working her silence a shield. That's when Lieutenant Colonel Harrow walked in. He was older, grizzled, the kind of guy who'd seen too much to care about posturing. He was there to inspect the weapons, but his eyes caught on Sarah's wrist as she adjusted her sleeve. The code KL013 flashed for just a second. Harrow froze. His face went pale like he'd seen a ghost. "Arrow 13. He murmured almost to himself. He stepped closer, his voice low. "Mitchell, where did you get that?" Sarah didn't answer. She just looked at him, her expression unreadable. Harrow pulled out his phone, opened an encrypted file, and scrolled through it. His hands were shaking. The screen showed a name, Ghost Viper, 013, Mitchell S. Kill count 208. He looked up at her, his voice barely a whisper. "Who are you really?" The room was dead silent now. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. Sarah didn't answer. She just pulled her sleeve down and went back to cleaning her rifle. But the air had changed. Harrow didn't push her, not in front of everyone, but he didn't take his eyes off her either. He left the room without another word, his phone still clutched in his hand. The other recruits didn't know what they'd just seen, but they felt it. Something was wrong. Something was big. And Sarah, the woman they'd called deadweight, was at the center of it. The next day, the live fire drill started. These were the real deal, high-pressure, high-stakes, the kind of tests that separated the recruits who'd make it from the ones who'd wash out. Sarah's squad was given the easiest targets, a slap in the face disguised as mercy. The range was loud, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder. Sarah stood at her station, her rifle ready, her face blank. That's when a recruit named Lucas, all bravado and bad decisions, stumbled in front of her just as she fired. The shot went wide, missing the target completely. Lucas laughed loud and mean. "Nice one, 013. Real sharpshooter." He pulled a marker from his pocket and grabbed her arm, scribbling a 0 onto her sleeve next to the tattoo. "Let me add a 0, 0, and 30. A perfect round number for a perfect 0. The other guys roared with laughter, their voices echoing across the range. Sarah stepped back. Her expression wasn't calm anymore. It was cold, sharp, like a blade catching the light. She didn't say a word, just looked at Lucas, her eyes locking onto his. He faltered, his laugh dying in his throat, but he doubled down. "What? You gonna cry about it?" Sarah didn't blink. She just turned, reset her rifle, and went back to her station. The range officer watching the whole thing didn't say a word. But he wrote something down on his clipboard, and his eyes kept flicking to Sarah. During a break, Lucas posted a photo of Sarah's marked sleeve on the camp's group chat, captioning it 0 of the day. The notifications lit up, recruits piling on with laughing emojis and cruel comments. Sarah sat on a bench eating an apple, her phone untouched. But her grip on the apple tightened just for a second before she took another bite. That night, the range officer pulled Lucas aside, his voice low. "That rifle you tripped in front of. It was rigged to jam. Mitchell fixed it before you even touched it." Lucas's smirk vanished, but he didn't say a word. The officer walked away, leaving him standing there, the group chat still buzzing on his phone. That afternoon, the camp announced a surprise sniper trial. It was meant for the veterans, the guys with years of experience, not the recruits. The targets were small, moving fast, set at impossible distances. The kind of challenge that could break even the best. The recruits gathered to watch, expecting a show. When Sarah stepped forward, rifle in hand, the laughter started again. "Oh, come on," Derek muttered. "She's going to embarrass herself." Marcus, still stinging from the GPS incident, smirked. Let her try. She'll miss every shot. Sarah didn't look at them. She just loaded her rifle, her movements smooth and precise like she'd done it 1,000 times. The target started moving. The crowd went quiet. Sarah breathed, her chest rising and falling once. Then crack. 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 5 shots. 5 bullseyes. In 6 seconds, the range officer's jaw dropped. The recruits stared, their mouths open. Sarah lowered her rifle, her face blank, and stepped back. The general, a tall man with a face like carved stone, walked down from the observation deck. He didn't say a word, just lifted Sarah's wrist and looked at the code. His eyes widened just for a second before he let her go. Mitchell, he said, his voice low. Report to my office. Now! Sarah nodded and walked off, her boots crunching against the gravel. Nobody laughed this time. Nobody said a word. The rumors spread like wildfire. By dinner, the mess hall was buzzing. She's a plant, one guy whispered. Special forces, maybe? Another shook his head. No way. She's too small. Too quiet. But Lucas wasn't buying any of it. He was loud, angrier than before, like Sarah's performance had personally insulted him. After dinner, he stormed into the barracks waving a printed sheet. This is fake, he shouted, slamming the paper onto a table. I found her file, no military history, no clearance. She's probably a spy. He turned to Sarah, who was sitting on her bunk, lacing her boots. You don't belong here, 13. We don't recognize you. He grabbed her name badge from her bunk and ripped it in half, tossing the pieces to the floor. Sarah didn't move. She just finished lacing her boots, stood up and reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small black tag no bigger than a coin and dropped it to the ground. It hit the floor with a faint clink. Everyone froze. The tag was a ghost unit command token, the kind of thing you only heard about in rumors. The kind of thing that meant power secrets and consequences. Lucas's face went white. He took a step back, his hands shaking. Sarah didn't look at him. She just picked up her bag and walked out, her steps slow and steady. The room was silent, the air heavy with something nobody could name. The next morning, during a routine inspection, Lucas's locker was searched. Inside, they found a stolen encryption key, one that could have compromised the entire camp's security. It wasn't Sarah's doing, at least not directly. But the officer who found it glanced at her just once before hauling Lucas away. The recruits watched in silence, their eyes wide, as Lucas was escorted off the base, his career over before it began. The next morning, the camp was different. Recruits who'd mocked Sarah avoided her eyes. The squad leader didn't bark at her to stay back. Even Brady, the officer who'd laughed at her tattoo, kept his distance. But the tension was still there, simmering under the surface. Everyone was waiting for something, for her to slip up, for the truth to come out, for the other shoe to drop. And then it did. Just after noon, the sound of rotor blades cut through the air. A black military helicopter touched down in the middle of the training field, kicking up dust and gravel. The recruits stopped what they were doing, their eyes wide. A man stepped out, his uniform crisp, his chest heavy with medals. General Hamilton, one of the highest-ranking officers in NATO. He didn't look at the crowd. He just walked straight to Sarah, who was standing near the edge of the field, her hands clasped behind her back. He stopped in front of her, his voice clear and sharp. Tell 1-3, you are hereby recalled. As of now, this base is under your command. He handed her a sealed directive, the kind of document that could start or end wars. Then he turned to the crowd, his eyes like steel. Anyone who disrespects her, your names will be filed at the ministry. Sarah didn't say a word. She just took the directive, her face unreadable, and turned to walk toward the command tent. The recruits stood at attention, their faces pale. Lucas, the loudmouth who'd ripped her badge, was already gone. But Derek, the guy who'd called her dead weight, stared at the ground. Brady, the officer, looked like he might be sick. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The helicopter's blades kept spinning, a low hum that filled the silence. The consequences came fast. Derek was gone by the next day, his name stripped from the roster after a review found he'd falsified his training logs. Carter, the female soldier who'd called Sarah trash, was reassigned to a desk job, her name whispered in the halls as a cautionary tale. Brady got a formal reprimand. His promotion delayed indefinitely, and a viral post on a military forum exposed his history of hazing recruits, ending his credibility. Nobody said it was Sarah's doing. Nobody had to. The truth was out and it was heavy. She wasn't just a recruit. She was Ghost Viper, 014, a name that carried weight in rooms most of them would never see. Sarah didn't stay long. She led the camp for a week, her orders quiet but absolute. Nobody questioned her. Nobody dared. When she left, it was in the same helicopter that had brought Hamilton her bag slung over one shoulder, her face still blank. The recruits watched her go, their eyes wide, their voices silent. She didn't look back. In the weeks that followed, the camp changed. The laughter died down. The boasting got quieter. People started asking questions before they judged. Not because they were better, but because they'd seen what happened when they weren't. Sarah's name became a story, a warning, a legend. But it wasn't about her tattoo or her kills or the general who'd bowed to her. It was about the way she'd stood there day after day taking the hits without breaking. The way she'd held her ground not with words or fists, but with something deeper. Something real. For everyone who's ever been called less than they are, who's been pushed to the back, who's been laughed at for existing, Sarah's story is yours. You know what it feels like to carry the weight of other people's words. You know what it means to keep walking anyway. You're not alone in that. You never were. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.